Put him up. It's time for Darkness the Fighters. I think I did that. Why do they call it Sonic the Fighters? It's such a dumb name.
So I set my course, my battle begins. There's no mistaking this feeling. I feel no remorse, no I can't resist. I'm breaking away.
I don't get it. Anyway, so as promised, we're going to talk about Sonic the Fighters. There's actually a lot of things about Sonic the Fighters that you may not know about, and I'm going to inform you about all the stuff that I happen to be aware of, which I'm sure isn't all of it, but there's actually quite a history when it comes to this game. But before I get into that, let's talk about the history of the game, and I'll give you a brief review of it, because in terms of reviewing it, I don't have that much to say. From the get-go, Sonic the Fighters is exactly what it looks like. It is a tournament fighter featuring characters from Sonic the Hedgehog. Now, some people might already be aware that this was actually based off of another fighting game called Fighting Vipers. Now, Fighting Vipers is kind of a successor to Virtua Fighter, but not really. It plays a lot differently, and Sonic the Fighters is based heavily on Fighting Vipers, to the point that in Fighting Vipers, the developer actually threw Sonic and Tails in as little bonuses, and that's how Sonic the Fighters kind of got off the ground. The little, thing that he just did for fun, he took it in front of Yuji Naka, who he expected to reject it because he didn't want to put Sonic in a fighting game, but it turned out Naka was all for it. He had been trying to figure out how to put Sonic in a fighting game because he didn't know how Sonic would be able to, properly fight with his short arms. But they managed to make it work, and the end result was Sonic the Fighters. It uses the same exact engine of Fighting Vipers, though it doesn't play exactly like it. It still was built from the ground up, though the similarities are pretty apparent, to the point of even recycling a lot of the code. Now, as for the game itself, well, it is interesting. A few facts about it. For one, this is, in reality, Sonic's first ever 3D outing. I know, most of you probably thought that would be Sonic R, or maybe even 3D Blast if you're not informed. To begin with, 3D Blast doesn't count, because 3D Blast was, despite being called 3D Blast, wasn't actually 3D, even on the Saturn. That was just 2D sprites shaded to make it look 3D and have an isometric perspective, but it was never actually 3D. Sonic R would be released in 1997, while Sonic the Fighters came out in 96 in arcades. So, technically speaking, Sonic the Fighters is the first time Sonic was in 3D, and to be honest, I think this is a much better example of Sonic's first push into 3D. While it is weird to see Sonic and company in a fighting game, it's pretty good for what it is, and the visuals are bright, colorful, and pretty good for the time. They definitely still retain somewhat of a polygonal look to them. You can see where the squares are on the models, particularly the ones that are more round than others, but for the time, this looked pretty decent, and it's surprisingly fun to play. It still retains a lot of stuff you might expect from fighting games with a tournament arc. You run through, you fight a bunch of guys, and you do combos and special moves and things like that. There's a shield mechanic which is oddly similar to Smash Brothers, and I find this game a lot easier to pick up and play and to do combos than most fighting games. It's pretty clear the design took into account the idea that younger gamers might be playing this, and therefore they wanted to make it easier for them to actually play it. It's not super deep compared to, say, Street Fighter, but it is a lot of fun, if you're just interested in beating somebody up, playing in multiplayer, or just messing around. It's certainly not bad, it's just not something that's gonna hold up compared to the modern technical fighter genres we got going on these days. Even back then, I think Street Fighter II and Mortal Kombat definitely had more mechanics when it came to special moves and combos than Sonic the Fighters does, but it wasn't ever designed to really compete with them. It was just kind of a fun, hey look, it's Sonic in a fighting game kind of deal for, someone to throw a quarter in and enjoy themselves. And for that purpose, it's actually quite good. The plot is, well, it's so dumb. It's just so dumb. So dumb, and I didn't expect it to be good. The second you have a fighting game with Sonic and he has to beat up his best friend Tails, yeah, this is dumb. And no, there's not like a mind control thing going on, there's nothing like that, because that might actually make some level of sense. That is not what we have here. Effectively, a bunch of robots start showing up, and then at first Sonic and Tails aren't sure why. Then they realize that Eggman has constructed in secret the Death Egg 2, which admittedly looks pretty frickin' baller, and is trying to take over the world again, as he does. Now, Tails has a spaceship he created, but it requires 8 Chaos Emeralds to work. Now, 2 problems here. 1, you made a spaceship. Now, spaceships, as you know, don't necessarily need outrageous power sources to function. I mean, they do, but they can still operate off of, like, fossil fuel. And still get into orbit. But you designed this specifically to work off of 8 Chaos Emeralds. Now, this is also weird, because I'm pretty sure the maximum has always been 7. Unless you count Sonic Spinball, in which case there were 15, and they were all blue. But I'm pretty sure nobody does that, because that was nuts too. Now, I fully believe that the reason there are 8 emeralds is actually quite simple. They wanted to have an even number of character slots, and 8 characters is a decent roster for a fighting game. So in order to make the plot work, they just said, oh, there's 8 emeralds in this game, for reasons that I personally do not grasp. So, yeah, this is ridiculous. As for why everybody's beating each other up, well, basically the issue is nobody can decide who's going into space and to stop Eggman. And since every character is oddly in possession of one of the emeralds, they have to fight each other over them. Now, I understand Tails made his spaceship to be a single-seater, but I don't really get why some of the characters are so keen on actually saving the world on their own. Like, Amy's in this game in her first 3D appearance, and the only 3D appearance of her classic Rosie the Rascal look from Sonic CD. And she wants to go stop Eggman on her own when the last time she dealt with him, she was kidnapped by Metal Sonic, who is also in this game. And... okay. I mean, I can kind of see Knuckles being a jerk about this, and maybe a handful of the other characters, but why? Why is this happening? And why are Sonic and Tails fighting over this? What, Tails is like, no, I'm done being the sidekick. I'm gonna be the hero this time, Sonic. Look, okay, the plot doesn't matter. It's a fighting game. It obviously wasn't made to be Shakespeare, I get that, but I only asked them to try, and I don't think they did. That's all I'm trying to say. As for the character roster, well, I gotta admit, the character roster, as well as the amount of arenas to fight in, is actually pretty friggin' good. Like I said, there are 8 playable characters. We have Sonic and Tails, which, good. Knuckles is here, also good. We have Amy as Rosie the Rascal, and then we have some weird ones. SBO oddly makes his first 3D appearance in this game, which is a surprise to me because none of the other Chaotix show up in the game. It's just SBO. I don't know why they chose him specifically, and filled up the rest of the roster with characters that you wouldn't normally have seen. The other 3 characters are Fang the Sniper in his only 3D appearance, and he's called Fang the Sniper in this game, which is pretty cool, as I always prefer that to Knack. And then the other 2. The other 2 are Bean the Dynamite and Bark the Polar Bear. Now, there isn't too much to say about Bark, except that I kind of dig his design. He was basically modeled to be the big, strong, but slow character that most fighting games have at least one of. Why they didn't use Vector for that, I'm not entirely certain, but Bark wouldn't be seen again until, once again, Sonic Mania, in which case he was seen as an illusion, as well as on a wanted poster with both Bean and Fang. And I actually thought that was really cool in Sonic Mania, frankly. I can't believe I didn't mention that in the review. I love that. That was great. As for Bean, well, Bean is an interesting one because, first of all, I adore Bean. He is hysterical. Bean throws bombs. He's a duck, and he throws bombs and pecks you. His fighting style is hilarious to me and will never not be funny to me. Why does he throw bombs? Why is he called Bean the Dynamite? Why not Bean the Duck? Because he's a duck. That's easy. Because he is a direct reference to a game called Dynamite Ducks, in which case you play as 2 ducks that use bombs. So the question then that presents is Dynamite Ducks in canon with the Sonic universe, since Bean is here? I do not know. All in all, the game is a ton of fun. There's actually 2 final bosses, one in the form of Metal Sonic, and Eggman in a mech, who you have to beat in 15 seconds, which is kind of pushing it. But that being said, for a game you pick up and play and just, mess around with, even playing it alone, it's fun. I actually really like Sonic the Fighters. I always have. It was definitely firmly in place as one of the best titles on Sonic Gems Collection when it was finally ported to home, and now, like I said, you can download it standalone on 360 and PS3. It hasn't been ported forward yet. I hope they decide to throw it on Steam at some point, but either way, it's cool that it's finally received some recognition because for a few years, it was only in arcades and it was a little bit more obscure. I was actually lucky enough to stumble upon a restaurant that just happened to have a cabinet, so I got to play it actually before Sonic Gems Collection even came out. So that was pretty cool. Anyway, but you are interested in the obscure facts, the obscure trivia about Sonic the Fighters. What awesome, deep, dark secrets do I possess that you don't? And will I share them with you? Yeah, sure, why not? Now, most of these facts regarding the game are going to be about characters that may or may not have ever been planned to be in the game, but their code is in there. And that's where we're going to really stick with, because that's where most of the interesting stuff about the game comes from. We're going to stick with a few of the minor ones first, because I'm pretty sure these guys may never have necessarily been meant to be playable characters, or if they were, they didn't get very far in development before they were like, no, we're not doing that. Now, there are Eggman mechs in the opening cutscene. These mechs can be brought into the game, at least in the arcade version, but they only use Eggman's mech battle system, and given the way they act, it's arguable they probably were never actually meant to be playable. They were just background objects, and they stuck their code in one of the character slots to make it easier to program. So that probably doesn't count much, but you can bring them into the game. Now, a more interesting one is Rocket Metal Sonic. What is Rocket Metal Sonic? Well, you see him briefly in the opening cutscene. However, when you go to fight Metal Sonic, it's just regular Metal Sonic. Now, why is that? Well, I have a few guesses. For one thing, you can bring Rocket Metal into the game and have him fight. It is possible to do. It requires some hacking and some issues, but it can be done. Now, the implication here is, does that mean that Rocket Metal was meant to be in the place of regular Metal to make him more distinctive, and at some point they decided to go with just regular Metal? I think that might be exactly the case because of one thing. Rocket Metal was always designed with the idea that he could turn into a jet. In fact, he does it in the opening cutscene. However, he doesn't actually turn into a jet. Well, he does to your eyes, but through looking at the game's code, we can tell what they actually did. See, they couldn't ergonomically design Rocket Metal to do that in a way that seemed realistic, at least not with a lot more time taken to figure it out. So basically, during the transformation scene, Rocket Metal gets turned into and replaced with a bunch of random objects that just kind of morph into each other. It's not actually his model doing it, it's drawing the objects from a different code source, and then it turns into the plane. I'm thinking that when they originally designed him, they wanted to use him, and they wanted him to be able to transform in one of his special moves, because that would have been really cool. But due to development constraints and time, they realized it couldn't be done, so they just went with classic Metal instead. But because someone must have been proud of their work, they left him in the opening cutscene as kind of a bonus. That's my thinking. I don't have any solid evidence to back the latter part of that claim up, but it seems likely, because why would they design a completely new Metal Sonic just to throw him for like 2 seconds in the opening cutscene and then never use him again? They probably meant to use him as one of the final bosses, and then realized they just didn't have enough time to implement what they wanted to do with him, so they went with regular Metal instead. Super Sonic is also an option. In fact, Sonic can become Super Sonic if you don't lose a round the entire time, right up until the second round with Metal, which is easier said than done, but it can be done. Now, as far as Super Sonic being a standalone playable character, I don't believe so. It probably is only in there because of the bonus, and since the bonus is there, it probably never meant you to be able to play as Super Sonic from the get-go, because as before they would have had to make him the best character in the game by default, like with Sonic R, and yeah, as an arcade game, that doesn't really make much sense. In addition, there is evidence to suggest that Eggman, not in mech, was possibly going to be a playable character at some point. This likely was very, very early, because the evidence of this is actually in fighting Vipers in the Japanese cabinet. Allegedly, there's no proof of this, but allegedly, there is a code that you can use to unlock an Eggman model in that version of that game. And an Eggman model naturally carries over into Sonic the Fighters, and they're so closely related that it is likely that at some point through tinkering with both games, they were originally going to use Eggman as some kind of capacity, just him alone without a mech. Now, as hilarious as it would be for a final round with Eggman to be just punching him in the face without a machine, that wouldn't be very exciting, and that's not really how Eggman works, and I see why they wouldn't have done that and opted out. As for him being a playable character, if it was ever planned, it probably didn't last very long because, let's be fair, Eggman running around punching people, that's just not his style. And it's obvious with the plot that he was always meant to be the villain. How could Eggman stop himself if this is a tournament? Doesn't make sense. Maybe for a home version, it might have been interesting, but as far as anyone can tell, it was never going to happen, at least not anywhere past the opening alpha phase of the game. However, there is one character that we can absolutely 100% confirm was absolutely going to be in the game 100% and then was removed. I'm talking, of course, about Honey the Cat. Now, some of you younger gamers may be a little confused by this, because Honey the Cat is in Sonic the Fighters. She was put in as a bonus unlockable character in the 360 PS3 version of the downloadable standalone game. But you may not know why that is, because she doesn't actually exist in other versions of the game, except that she does. Up until the release of Sonic Gems Collection, nobody outside of the developers apparently knew that she was ever planned for the game. But when the code was analyzed by hackers through Sonic Gems Collection, they found scraps of what originally was Honey's code. Her character model is not in Sonic Gems Collection, but some of her original coding is. So this led them on the breadcrumb trail of figuring out, what was this character? Who was this? Where was she from? And in the original cabinet, it was discovered Honey. Her model was there. She was unfinished, but she was there. Who is she? Well, Honey is directly based off of Honey from Fighting Vipers. There's a character named Honey in Fighting Vipers. Honey the Cat is supposed to be a Sonic character version of that character, thus tying it in with Fighting Vipers even more because, like I said, these games are very closely related. It was supposed to be kind of a Easter egg character, you know, something fun. Honey's got a cool design, that would have been nice. For whatever reason, this didn't pan out in the original cabinet. Perhaps they had enough characters as it was, didn't want to up it to 9. Perhaps they couldn't figure out how to implement her over anybody else, since she was more of an Easter egg reference rather than an original character. Most of the roster was already taken up by characters that would have been recognizable, with only a couple new ones anyway. In any case, for one reason or another, Honey was left unfinished, but her model and her code was still there. Now, through hacking tools, it is possible to bring Honey into the game and use her in the original Sonic the Fighters, and to a certain extent in Gems Collection. Now, in Gems Collection, she basically doesn't work at all. It doesn't even load her, because her model isn't there. So that's irrelevant. But in the original game, her model does load. It is flawed, she isn't working fully, and her eyes are messed up. Some sources will tell you that one of her eyes is always white, and while that's technically true, they are missing the actual issue here. See, in Sonic the Fighters, all the eyes have unique code. The code basically makes sure that the eyes of the characters are always looking at their opponent outside of, say, victory scenes and stuff like that. Honey's, for whatever reason, are screwed up, where one of her eyes, usually the right one, is forced to always look away from the camera, whereas the other eye is always forced to look directly at the camera. So it looks like to us that one of her eyes is always white, and one of her eyes is always looking dead at us. When what's actually happening is one of her eyes, the one that's white, is actually completely right around inside of her head, which is actually way creepier than what we thought, so that's good. In any event, when this was revealed, Honey got some cult popularity among the Sonic fan base. Like, people were doing fan art and stuff, like this lost character that nobody had ever seen before, that people thought were cool. She had a neat design, and the reference was neat to a relatively obscure fighting game. Like, Fighting Vipers isn't brought up very often. It's not a fighting game that most people talk about anymore. And the idea that Sonic the Fighters ever had a character that can be proven to have been, like, fully ready to be implemented into the game, yet not, is always something that gets gamers, like, interested. Like, any kind of fighting game usually has characters that were left on the cutting room floor for one reason or another. All the ones I've mentioned, it's debatable how far they got along before they were axed, or if they were ever planned to actually be playable at all. But in Honey's case, it is abundantly clear that she was meant to be in the game and playable. Now, Sega, over the years, took notice of the fans that Honey was getting. They realized people knew she was supposed to be in the game, which is, of course, why in the 360 PS3 version of Sonic the Fighters, she was included finished as an unlockable character. And I would say that's pretty awesome of them. They didn't have to do that, but it just goes to show that there are plenty of times where Sega does pay attention to what their fans want and wanted to throw that in for the really hardcore ones that knew who Honey was and really wanted to see her finish. I think she kind of deserves it. She's a pretty cool character. We don't get that many female Sonic characters in the games, so it's nice to see someone, brought back from the grave and thrown a bone every once in a while. I don't know whether we'll ever see her again outside of Sonic the Fighters. She has shown up in some of the comics on occasion, but besides that, I don't know if I'd ever, expect her to come up in an actual Sonic game outside of a spin-off, but it is still cool that she was in there. Anyway, that's Sonic the Fighters. Pretty good game if you ever get the chance to play it. I would recommend it as, a curiosity, just a fun experience to play just for kicks. Don't expect anything hardcore or serious or, hard, serious ranked matches. This is Street Fighter, Guilty Gear, ooh, very serious. Oh god, it's not like that. It's not gonna be like that. It's not ever gonna be like that. But if you want some stupid fun in a fighting game that you don't have to take seriously, yeah, Sonic the Fighters will do you just fine. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.